The next era of global leadership is truly regional knowledge base. You're going to need to understand the cultural difference, the different dynamics, how sales methodology may differ, support methodology may differ.
Welcome to Beyond Borders, New York Edition, a Multiplier talk series that brings together global first thought leaders and entrepreneurs to discuss the future of work. In this episode, hear from world-class leaders on how to build and manage global teams across borders.
Hello, my name is Matt Carr. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Multiplier. I'm joined by Vinnie from Trinet. Today we're going to be talking about how to build and scale global teams. Excited to be here. Vinnie, if you wouldn't mind, and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Matt. Excited to be here as well. My name is Vinnie DiAngelo. I'm the VP of People Operations and Organizational Effectiveness at Trinet.
So first question up, Vinnie, why do companies need to build global teams?
That's a good one. So I think starting with why is critical. It's a question that I think sometimes teams or leaders are uncomfortable with sitting on for a little while. And you really have to think it through deeply because there's not actually one right answer. There's sort of multiple answers and approaches you can take there. So giving sort of thinking in frameworks a little bit, sometimes teams need to understand maybe there's an opportunity to reduce costs as an organization. Also, there's talent availability that teams often need to think through. So maybe there's a scarcity of talent in any given market, a market that you're in, and you know that there's more talent in another market. Take India is a really great example. We hear a lot of tech talent coming out of India. If you look at the data, it'll show you the United States, as an example, graduates anywhere, about 500,000 STEM students a year.
Sure.
India is graduating 2.5 to 5 million STEM students a year, right? So you're looking at anywhere from 5 to 10 times that amount. So you're looking at talent availability play there. Oftentimes, also, you might be looking at a model where people want to follow the sun. We want to service our customers 24/7. You can't do that from one location necessarily unless you're running multiple shifts. So sometimes you might look to globalize teams and say, well, if we have a team, as an example, in the US, a team in India, a team in multiple locations across the globe, maybe the Philippines, you can really support your customers better in a way that's going to be beneficial to your organization. I think the critical part, though, is thinking through those and figuring out how it links to your strategy, right? It all has to tie up. So usually companies have different strategies, but generally when you think about a strategy, it has a few main components across most companies, right? You have some sort of investor or shareholder return that you're looking to generate. You have some sort of commitment or experience you want for customers and for your colleagues. You also have financial goals. Sometimes you also have community-oriented goals. So if you're thinking about the reasons to sort of globalize a team or go global, you really have to think about how it anchors up to your strategy. Now, if you can answer the question, I would advise maybe you don't, and you figure out, what you're actually trying to accomplish, because sitting on that question for a moment and getting clarity there is going to really help you with everything downstream, and you're going to make better decisions as you go down the path of actually trying to globalize than you would if you were sort of guessing out of the gate.
I think what's exciting too is what used to be reserved as for the enterprise space is now SME, small market, mid-market.
Yes.
Organizations today can expand globally. Remote work from home has opened up a ton of opportunities for companies to think about opening new markets, servicing customers in different ways, and expanding their product reach as well.
Yeah.
So it is definitely, I think, an opportunity. And I think most organizations, if not today, in the very near future, are going to have to think about their global strategy and how to continue to expand.
I completely agree. I think the exciting thing is I often think about sort of like leveling the playing field for small and mid-sized businesses, right? So historically, like you're saying, used to be reserved for these large, enterprise players. And so if you think about sort of the EOR space, the PEO space, right, you're starting to level the playing field for small and mid-sized businesses and attract the talent that, these companies also need to be successful and to service their customers. So no longer really at a disadvantage if you're working with the right partners and leveraging the right tools.
No question.
Yeah.
Next up, so what are some of the factors you need to weigh in when deciding where to hire?
I think if you lever back up to your strategy, a critical thing to think about is your principles as an organization. It's just a fancy way of saying, what do you believe, right? It's not an ethical or a moral question. It's just like, what do you think is the right approach for your company working successfully. So I'll give you like sort of the range of examples, right? You have some of the organizations that say, we're going to be completely remote, distributed across the globe, and we're going to work asynchronously.
Yeah.
So sometimes we're on, but that's our culture. We believe that could be successful based on our strategy, our clients we support. Then you have some companies that are going to sort of concentrate in hubs globally, but they're going to be working more in person, more frequently. Maybe they're not as remote, right? And so you've got to balance on these things. So once you figure out sort of what you believe and what you're trying to accomplish, then that brings you into forming a point of view of where you want to go. And so where you want to go, to me, is a mix. If you think about a bunch of weighted factors, right?
Yeah.
You have to think about those things. So you have your strategy, you have your principles, and it allows you to form a point of view. So based on what you're trying to accomplish, that'll determine which market you leverage. So
I also think too is, to your point, long-term versus short-term strategy. What does the entry look like, but also the exit? Because going into a new country or a new region, setting up an entity, legal, compliance, benefits, it's not just a turn off the lights and exit if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of compliance and audit and procedure that goes into an exit. So you really got to think about like the short-term goal, long-term goal, and what type of investment to make, when to make it, and how deep you want to go before you go all into a new market.
Well, I agree. And I think something about leveling the playing field that we were talking about earlier is sort of the ability to be a little bit more agile, right? And be able to sort of, depending on sort of the tools and the resources you're using, be able to step into a market and test it. Also why I would recommend using the tools at your disposal to be able to research that market and understand it better. And that's a big part of the how. So if you're doing your diligence and you understand what you're trying to accomplish, you can get in and ask the right questions to the right partners. And partnership is really, really critical. So that's a huge part of it, I think.
Are there any emerging global talent hubs today that people are underestimating?
On the non-emerging, you have sort of India, we talked about earlier, very well established. Interestingly enough, maturing and evolving though. So even if it's not necessarily emerging, if it's stabilized, what you're seeing there is the rise of sort of these global capability centers. It's no longer just this idea of, hey, can we shift transactional work somewhere, right? It's the idea of like, well, if we're going to make the investment, put the time in to really establish global teams, how can we get more? How can teams there make an impact? Could we get more for our investment? And so what we're seeing is sort of the evolution and the maturity of those markets that have been established. And then behind that, you have emerging markets. I've seen some research recently, if you're looking as an example in like South America, right? You have actually an emergence of, say, Colombia. There's a lot of graduates coming out of those markets, and sort of the demand for work is higher than the supply of work. So what you end up with is, highly educated folks coming out of these the colleges with the inability maybe to find jobs at the numbers that they need to. And so those are really great opportunities there. And then I've also seen some emerging research on other areas like Vietnam as an example from a tech.
Well, I think to your point is like there's the traditional markets of the Philippines and India. But a couple of different things. There was research put out about how there's going to be over 300,000 shortage of accountants. So there's a lot of new hubs in Eastern Europe and Latin America that are developing. And then you also think about, with the two favorite letters we're all probably sick of hearing is AI. So there is a huge influx of front end, back end, and full tech stack engineering too, of these hotbeds and hubs that are coming up.
Yes.
So organizations that can really get ahead of that and think critically about how to lean into the curve on the engineering side. So we're seeing a lot of different tech hubs that are evolving well beyond the traditional Philippines and India, which is exciting and opportunistic for companies to take advantage of because the talent pools is starting to become very vast for organizations to think about their next phase of growth.
Absolutely. So you have a combination of higher talent availability, potentially lower competition if you're stepping into some of those markets and establishing yourself earlier. You're first or maybe second mover in those. So that's a good mix. On your AI point, I think it's an excellent one, and it speaks to the evolution of some of these markets that I was talking about earlier, because it's like, if you expect that, you want to send transactional work over somewhere, globally, you're probably better off investing in automation or AI to some degree, right? So that's a sort of a short-term play anyway. So you might be better off with your investment there. And with the work you are shifting, thinking about, well, how do we drive sort of higher order work that can make a larger impact for the organization. So,
what are the biggest challenges of building a global team?
Where do you want to start?
Can I start?
Yeah, you should
Okay,
start. Yeah, you go.
I think for me, the biggest challenge I've faced on the revenue side is attracting talent without a presence. So that's why I think it's so critical for an organization to have a really good long-term strategy and be able to paint the picture to talent.
Yes.
To be able to walk them through what your methodology is, what your go-to-market strategy is over what period of time. Because not every person wants to be on that type of journey with some of that level of ambiguity.
Yeah.
So attracting talent, really have to understand the local benefit side too of what benefits need to be offered, what's competitive, what isn't competitive.
Yes.
Because sometimes you're going into new regions where you have zero presence and your closest presence is a 10-hour plane ride away.
Yeah.
So that to me has been one of the biggest challenges we've really adapted well at Multiplier.
Yeah.
Is understanding these regional nuances and where the talent pools are and what our, clients or customers are going to be, influenced by to potentially join.
Yeah, for sure. So let me maybe take that question in three parts. So one is, I think about infrastructure, right? So a simple sentence like, can you compliantly hire, employees in the country in which you want to operate, right? Okay, so that sounds like, maybe pretty easy, but then you're talking entity creation, right? Can you legally actually do business in that country or hire people in that country? And so anywhere from some countries are 3 months real quick. Some countries are a year or plus, right? So you can't even step foot without necessarily your own entity. And then you're talking about labor laws, employment law, which is different per country. You're talking about tax treatment, right? So sort of just setting up the infrastructure to be able to hold your talent, right? That's one. The second piece on the talent side is you're 100% right. It's like, well, it's not just base and bonus and equity. Everywhere you go, it's sort of all these different sort of iterations of compensation philosophy. Some countries you have a 13th month bonus, right? So there's all these nuances you learn that make sense once you understand them, but maybe not obvious out of the gate. Then you're looking at your sourcing and your talent strategy to what you're talking about. The thing that I found is most helpful there is to really come in with an open mind. So and speak to people who are local. On the ground, who understand, right? So whether you're working with a partner, like in EOR, whether you're working with a government or it's sort of a what do you call it? Government adjacent organization that helps support economic development in that country. If you're talking to leaders who have stood up organizations in that country I've reached out to some and they're always very generous with their time, right? It's sort of a close community. Or you talk to other leaders who have worked with companies in whatever country you might be coming from to stand up operations there, really sort of speaking to them to understand the challenges, what's unique about that market. It will absolutely accelerate your development in that country and allow you to have a talent proposition, I would say, or an employment brand and a proposition whereby you can attract the talent you need to be successful. But if you're not speaking their language, you're going to fall short and you're going to have trouble attracting good talent, the right talent. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So how do you get started?
There's this sort of argument of, I guess you would say, or the conundrum of like, do you hire first?
Yeah.
Or do you try to establish yourself? And what I found is most helpful, and it's sort of, I guess, parallel to the partnership question is, I found it really helpful to say, like, can we hire an anchor in this country, a leader? Doesn't have to be a country leader necessarily, but a senior most sort of leader who is going to be that person on the ground to be able to help you build the team, to be able to translate what you're trying to actually accomplish in terms that will resonate in that country. And so in some countries, it's more common for sort of like an expat situation. In other countries, it's much more common for someone who is from that country to work back with your organization. So it really depends what's more common there.
Yeah.
But I mean, my humble opinion is, you can really accelerate your learning and the build out of a team if you have someone really on the ground there that's an advocate for your organization.
So you hit on a word there with learning. I was the word for me was education. You need to educate yourself on what the options are.
Yeah.
Because you think about the task of going global or moving into a new country and new markets and talent, compliance, all these different challenges that seem daunting. I think you need to educate yourself on what the options are first. And you have to have that operational agility, which is mission critical. And that's where EOR, employer of record, which is sometimes an undereducated, asset in the market, is a phenomenal way to test pilot a market where their compliance is outsourced, the talent is outsourced, to where you can really trial and understand, is this the right market, is this the right infrastructure, and then get a sense of what your clients are telling you, what type of investment you might need to make to service them or to continue to expand in that market. So I've just been a big believer in, to your point on like that local learning, is educating yourself on like what are the options out there that other organizations have taken advantage of. And employer of record has been a really dynamic tool for companies to be very agile and nimble, but also minimal investment and risk, which has been a good balance.
And that's a good point on the infrastructure bit, right? That can take a lot to stand up. So it's an EOR model you're leveraging the EOR's infrastructure right? to be able to build from there and test and learn. Yeah. So absolutely.
Because with success in a new market also brings challenges. And you got to think about language, service, tech stack, and then connectivity to the other organizations that you're operating in. So it can be challenging, but education, I think, is definitely the number one priority. Get a sense of what options are out there and what's going to be the right fit for your organization.
Yeah, I agree. I would say laddering all the way up to the beginning around strategy and understanding your intent is critical, and weighting those factors of what you care about most and what you maybe could let go. So as an example, we were talking earlier, it's like, does English language proficiency matter? And you're like, well, sometimes. But if I gave you a list of, 10 factors, how would you weight them? What's most important? Yes, it would be great to have all of them, but you're not going to get all of them, right? So you really actually have to push and think and have it forces a really great, honest conversation internally as an organization to say, what matters most? What are we really aiming towards? And then how do we weight those? And then when you're educating yourself about those markets, what you're actually doing is holding up that North Star and saying, okay, well, how do these compare? How's the English language in this country? Well, moderate, but that doesn't actually matter for what we're trying to accomplish. Or maybe it's really critically important because historically, as an organization, our clients, when someone answers the call, expects a certain level of English language proficiency, and that's absolutely critical. So it's what you're doing is putting the countries through multiple filters, and then you sort of have your options at the end, and then you get to choose amongst them, right? So that's a really kind of clean way to go about it, because it'll hold you and your biases in check too, because we all sort of have biases when we're looking through these things. So it holds your biases in check, and there's plenty of information available. But again, it depends on your industry.
What we found too is the cross-functional alignment is so critical, because what I'm trying to accomplish in my organization and my North Star might be these three things, but from an HR perspective, an infrastructure, tech stack, or service perspective, it could interfere with what they're trying to do.
Yeah, that's right.
So really, I think the work is challenging in a good way, because it does give organizations really good alignment, especially cross-functionally at the top, and understanding what each organization is tasked with accomplishing, how they're trying to grow and scale their organizations, what some of the challenges are, because they're all usually very like-minded and proficient people in the room that can bring a lot of value that a lot of times in a global organization, you don't get those opportunities to really sit down and strategize with your cross-functional counterparts. So I found that as some of the best work we've done. Is being able to say, hey, well, I represent the revenue side of the house. We need to expand here, and here's why. And then almost having some of those stop gaps that say, well, hey, have we thought through this lens or this lens or this lens? And it really gives you that, to your point, that North Star and that education of a well-rounded perspective on, okay, now we know why we're going into this market.
Yes, that's right.
We know what the risk is. We know what the infrastructure we need. We're all in unison. That's where the magic happens. Things typically take off.
Yeah, 100%. So that's a great point, right? So if you're thinking about, we're expanding in the market, right? All right. what's your product? Do you need people on the ground? What kind of people? How many? Right? And that's so that's
I like
different.
to expand.
I know. Well,
like to
right, that's your job, right? But it's different when you're saying, well, it's actually we're standing up resources in support of the organization, but we're not actually taking revenue in those countries, right? Or all our revenue might be here. This is a support and enabling sort of a capability center, if you will, or a hub to sort of support folks back in whatever the home country is, right? As an example. So that, again, being super crystal clear, it does force that alignment internally with your leaders and foster really good conversations. Some of them, if you're just stepping into this world of globalization, aren't always easy. And going back to your word about education, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of education.
Yes.
But, I can tell you one of the sort of signs of progress, I would say, that's really encouraging is when folks around the table start echoing each other and they're all speaking the same language around what this means for the organization, why it's important, the different nuances of the countries that you're going into. You could feel a tone and tenor shift in the conversation, and that's where if you're driving these efforts, they're starting to take hold. Right?
What comes first, in your opinion, when expanding globally? Market traction or hiring?
Hiring.
I agree.
Yeah, if I have to go for it, I'm going high.
I agree. Based on what we were talking about earlier, I think if you go all into a new region in a new country, the amount of investment risk and infrastructure required is quite significant.
Yes.
And I think hiring is a low risk proposition to where you can accomplish both. You can start to get some market traction and analyze what are the resources needed, where do we need to pivot, and get situational awareness versus going full in to a new region. I think brings a lot of undue risk. And that's been the most successful for a lot of our clients at Multiplier, has been able to test pilot regions through employer record, which we talked about. Where they're able to have low risk, seamless transition into countries, into new regions, and really get a sense of what they need to be prepared for. How you structure contracts, how you're going to pay people in different currencies and currency exchange rates. I mean, there's a lot of nuance that goes into it. So I would be a firm believer in hiring first. I think market traction will come with the hiring. But going all in first to drive market traction first, to me, would give me some hesitation.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that knowledge of the market also supports market traction, right? And feeding back those sort of nuances of, well, how are you even operating in this country and will it resonate, right? If you're trying to expand there, I think that's a big one. I'm curious, when you see clients stepping into new countries, do you often see them hiring leaders or managers first, or do you see them hiring individual contributors first?
Typically individual contributors. So a lot of times they're project or contract based. So, hey, we got a new contract with XYZ government. We need X amount of people in this country for the next 6 to 12 months. So there could be like temporary workers or contractors. It's typically individual contributors first through a specific project or a growth initiative, and then layering in an infrastructure from there.
Yeah. That's interesting. I've seen it done both ways, and again, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. I think if you're trying to take a set up shop and sort of take a foothold in a country, I've seen hiring leaders first be more successful because they are sort of the anchor to your part of your infrastructure. Well, not your entity and things, but your team infrastructure and your talent there, and being able to understand how to operate in a country. But if it's on a project base, I could see individual contributors first.
So most of our customers do come in contract basis. What's interesting is, for myself personally, we're actually, as we're entering new markets, we're thinking about a leadership framework first, because we know we're going to be entering these countries for a long term. So we need to have that presence, and we need to have that cadence and that communication and that infrastructure for these people to be successful. So I think, to your point, it really just depends on the when and where and why you're going into the country, because we've seen from our customers that are project-based typically are going contributor level first. But then if it's a strategic long-term growth initiative like we are doing for ourselves, we're looking leader-based first.
Yeah, that's right. So having visibility and line of sight, and again, tying it all the way up, like I continue to say it, but tying it all the way up to your strategy and making sure it's enabling your strategy, absolutely critical.
Okay, what do you think will define the next era of global leadership?
Oh, we're going to play this back in 2 years or 3 years? Okay. So I think, there's a huge component here of empathy, listening, cultural understanding, like seeking to understand, asking questions, right? Like humility. I think as you think about building, if you're thinking about being a global leader, if you're there long term, you've got to give up some accountability in some ways and responsibility to say like, hey, I don't get to make all the decisions, and at some point I get to be an input to that. And we got to make sure we're aligned. We have to have shared goals. We need to all be rowing in the same direction. But ultimately, if I have a counterpart in India and, he or she may be responsible for actually leading those individuals on a day-to-day basis, sure, I'm going to want to interview and have input into that process, but I no longer have the decision rights on who gets hired, right? Because if things are going well, congratulate that leader. If things aren't going well, it's the leader who's accountable, who, will chat and try to figure out a better path forward. But ultimately, you have to be sort of humble enough to say, okay, it's a partnership now, right? Yep. I don't get to hold all those reins, and really having close collaboration and seeking to understand. Because as an example, things might work slightly different if you're trying to go through a talent acquisition process in the U.S. versus India, as an example. All of the steps are there, right? But sometimes they're in a slightly different order, or the expectation of talent in a certain market is, you're not, I'm going to interview you in the U.S. and then in a week or so, you might get an offer. In other markets, it's like, I expect an offer in 24 hours if things are going well, right? And that's what's happening across an entire country. So you're not competitive if you're not adjusting. So again, similar steps, slight nuances, hard to understand from the outside unless you're working with those partners and listening and asking.
I couldn't agree more. And I think leadership of old was really about like process, methodology, strategy, and systems. Like if you had experience with that, you know how to go into a new environment, operate, scale, and execute. Right. I think where you're going, what I hear from you saying is you're going to need to adapt. The next era of global leadership is truly regional knowledge base. You're going to need to understand the cultural difference, the different dynamics, how sales methodology may differ, support methodology may differ, right. Talent acquisition significantly different around the world. Notice periods are different, right. Contracts are different.
Very different.
So I think what was a typical systems, strategy, methodology play is really going to morph into the demand of global leaders to truly understand the nuances of these regions.
Yes.
Otherwise, I don't believe you'd have the ability to continually drive long-term scale.
Agree. It brings up the conversation around sort of culture and values, right?
Yeah.
So, I think it's really important to have values alignment, right? Across different, countries or regions. That's really critical. You have to understand and actually lean in and have really good conversations about where you flex culturally, like where you're flexing maybe your processes and things like that to meet cultural demands so that you can remain competitive and remain an employer choice in those markets. But that doesn't actually mean that you just go, well, whatever you'd like to do culturally, we trust that makes sense, right? So it's that partnership, and it's the sort of, sometimes you feel like maybe you're feeling around in the dark a little bit together to figure out, okay, where do we flex and where do we stay consistent across the board? Because, flexing a little bit for, say, the operational sort of disruption or inefficiency it would cause isn't actually worth it in the end once you have the conversation. Yep. So, you're not always chasing perfect, but you really do have to kind of constantly be in contact and working together and have shared goals to understand what are we trying to achieve and how do we best get there.
I think you have to have an operational cadence. Like what are the things you must do every week, month, quarter?
Yes. That
cadence is so critical, especially on a global stage. Time zones can become very difficult to manage. So you really have to have the right cadence first. Then you have to, I've always been a big believer in like the rules of engagement, which is just to what you were saying about like who owns what.
Yeah.
And having that healthy balance of partnership and empowerment, but also the ability to challenge the status quo and make sure there's proper guardrails in place to ensure value and consistency. So that to me is what's really played well for us in our growth is clearly establishing, hey, here's going to be our operating rhythm as a leadership team. These are the things we're going to do every week or month or quarter. Here's how we're going to communicate. Here's the things that you can own in your world that I don't, necessarily need to know about, but that will be a core function of our conversations to ensure quality control and that we're operating the business correctly.
you got it. And it's a better experience for everyone. And on that level, just having the sort of empathy and sensitivity to say, we're a global organization now. And so we need to accommodate being global, meaning, if you have a team that's 12 hours away, pick your distance, right? 12 hours away. We're not always going to have all hands meetings at noon Eastern. You know what I mean? So it takes a little bit of adjustment there, but that's part of it, being really thoughtful and being deliberate and saying, and empowering teams to make them feel comfortable speaking up and saying, like, maybe that just slipped your mind, and then raising their hand and going, just so you know, that's always at midnight for us. Like, it's every once in a while we got it, but maybe not the best experience all the time, right? So that comes to having an open relationship.
To the open part that you mentioned is feedback. And I've always been a big believer too of, I've had a saying, the answers are in the field. And I know it's demanding to travel globally, but I feel like you have to have a presence. If you're going to truly be a global leader, at least once a quarter or whatever your cadence is going to be, I think you need to be in the market, and you have to understand at the ground floor, what some of the challenges are, what's working, what isn't working, have that constant loop of feedback that the C-suite has to take seriously, because ultimately, if you don't have the right infrastructure, the right process methodology at the ground floor, you can't grow the organization. So I've enjoyed being able to go into these different markets and really just listen and learn, get feedback, and ask people what we're doing well, what we're doing wrong, and where can we, how can we make you bigger, faster, and stronger? Because ultimately, to your point, they have to have that mentality of we're in this together, which is difficult to do around the world and around the clock. And yes, that cadence and structure is very important. Otherwise, sleep seems to disappear.
Disappear. I agree. And I'll tell you, it's wonderful to be able to travel into these markets, and the amount of things you learn from just going there and being on the ground is, you're never going to learn it academically, through research, through just, speaking to people, you get a lot of sense of it, but being there on the ground makes all the difference in the world. And I'll tell you if I think about from a change perspective, as organizations mature and leaders are thinking about sort of, well, does it make sense for any of my team to be global and things like that? Maybe some leaders aren't familiar with it, so they don't have a sort of a point of reference. I have absolutely seen sending leaders to those markets change hearts and minds, more so than 6 months of conversations with me personally. So, you save yourself time. Obviously there's a logic and an intuition. There's a logic to things, but I think the if you're talking about not just changing, but changing sort of hearts and having people feel like, oh, I understand this market. I see the talent. I met the people. They are capable of doing excellent work. I can't recommend it enough.
I think it enhances your business perspective. It enhances your strategic level to really understand that perspective and gain an insight into these different markets. It involves you in a healthy way. So I've enjoyed it as much as time away from family and the stress of travel isn't great, but I think it's a strategic weapon in business.
I agree.
Thank you for the conversation, Vinnie. It's been great talking to you. This has been our Beyond Borders New York edition. It's been an awesome dialogue. For those listening and tuning in, if you're thinking about expanding globally, hopefully you found the content great and insightful. Feel free to look up Multiplier and all the services we can provide you. Thank you again, Vinnie. Appreciate your time, and talk to you soon.